and today's show again is called Souls of Sexual Assault. Today we have the opportunity to make sure all of us are aware of sexual assault, who's at fault, who's at risk, what the services are, and I have the good fortune of having both Tina Robinson and Cheryl Wilson from Contact Lifeline, and make sure I get the name right, joining us today to give us some information. So welcome, ladies. Thank you so very much for being here on a Sunday. This is what we call dedication, when people just, as soon as you call them, like, I'm there, you know, so I thank you very much. So before we get into the topic for today, just a little bit first, tell me a little bit about your organization, because Tina and I are always out there in the field at health fairs talking, and I'm just very impressed whenever she does a display. I'm always, you know, over here looking and reading at her material. So tell us a little bit about your organization.
Okay. Contact Lifeline is Delaware's 24/7 crisis helpline services. We provide services for those who are in crisis. Our mission is to keep people safe and alive and to connect them with the resources that they need to stay safe. We also are the only rape crisis hotline in the state of Delaware, and as well as we answer the suicide hotline 273-TALK. If you've ever been over the Delaware Memorial Bridge, you see that great big phone number that says 273-TALK. That is us answering that phone on the other line, trying to assist some of our friends who are in need of help at that particular time in their life.
Okay, and what is your position at the agency?
Yeah, I am the prevention specialist. Contact Lifeline has been available to the citizens for over 35 years, and they've been providing resources for victims of rape and suicide for that time. Well, they've moved on they've elevated their level of intervening in sexual assault by introducing prevention as a whole, and that's 3 levels of prevention. That's tertiary, the long-term types of prevention; secondary, that's educating our community and assault and awareness information; and hopefully primary, where we actually get in front of this violent type of behavior and address the behaviors that help support rape in our culture.
Okay, very good. And Cheryl, just quickly, tell us, what do you do at Contact Lifeline?
Well, my title at Contact Lifeline is Rape Aftercare Counselor. When victims call into the crisis hotline, they talk to the volunteers, and if the volunteers determine that we have someone that needs long-term counseling, then they're then referred to me, and then I have a conversation with them, talk to them a little bit about what some of their concerns are, and then invite them in for an intake appointment and see them for counseling.
Okay, wow. Okay, very good. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of the myths around sexual assault and rape, because when I started out preparing for this show and invited Tina to come on, I had started putting together a little flyer, and I had domestic violence on the flyer, and Tina called me up and said, "Girl, you got to change this flyer." And I'm like, "What? What's wrong?" And you know, she's like, there's a difference between sexual assault and domestic violence. And so there began my education. I'm like, okay, well, I'm a pretty educated person, but if I don't know some of this information, I'm sure that our audience doesn't either. So why don't we start with some of the myths or the definition of the two, just so that we know, that our audience knows the difference, because you explained something to me that I wasn't aware of.
Certainly. Sexual violence is pretty much a violent crime against a woman concerning, obviously, the act of unwanted sex without consent. Domestic violence can be all-encompassing, which means physical violence, sexual violence, psychological violence, emotional violence, spiritual violence, you name it. If it's an act of an assault and it's unwanted towards a person, you pretty much get that definition. We would like to just say up front that sexual violence is not talked about a lot in our communities, and it needs to be, and for that reason, hopefully you'll see the hotline number across your screen. We like to invite any person that even hearing this conversation may trigger a past event and cause them to have some issues. We like to make you aware that the hotline is open right now and awaiting your call if you are in assistance. You are not alone, and we're here to help you 24 hours, 7 days a week.
All right, she said 24/7, everyone. So if you yourself or you know someone who needs some extra support dealing with the issue of having been sexually assaulted, please take advantage of this very free 24/7 service. Okay. All right. So the difference between sexual assault and domestic violence is, one, domestic violence could include sexual assault, but not necessarily.
Yes.
Okay. And sexual assault, I would also imagine the difference is that with domestic violence, you're usually talking about someone in some sort of relationship. The people definitely know each other, whereas with sexual assault, it could be someone is a assaulted on the street, in some kind of public place. It includes young people as well as older people. When I started the show out, I called reference to the fact that the woman who wore these shoes was 96 years old. Now, if this is the oldest person, what was the youngest?
The youngest sexual assault victim in the state of Delaware was 3 months old.
Okay, I want you all, can we get a look at these shoes? 3 months old, okay, this little victim here. Wow. So are there some myths that people, you know, sort of put out there or think exist with respect to sexual assault?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, the myths are what the general public tend to believe about rape. And number one is that it's the victim's fault. We are a very victim-blaming type of society that once we read about a rape or hear about it on the news, it is not uncommon for somebody's response to be, well, what did they do to deserve this type of treatment? We very seldom hold the perpetrator of sexual assault accountable by asking, why did that person rape that person?
Okay. Okay, so first thing is we end up blaming the victim, okay, thinking that that person, and let's for all intents and purposes, let's at least just focus on women, because we do know that men are sexually assaulted. If you saw the PSA, you saw that 1 in 6 women are assaulted and 1 in 33 men, okay, so we're not being gender biased here, but for the most part, the sexual assault is mostly perpetrated on women, okay,
exactly.
So I'm not trying to rule anybody out, but we're just trying to keep the conversation flowing. So very often it might be, well, what was she wearing, or was she flaunting herself at this, this person, as opposed to why did this person assault her if she said no or didn't consent to it?
Exactly.
Okay. Are there any other myths?
Yes. The other myth that's overwhelmingly done in our society is when people say that they lied about being raped, and that this is something that girls do when they get caught and they get in trouble and they want to get out of trouble with their parents. Just like any other crime, people do lie. It does happen, but it's less than 2%, no greater than any other crime that people lie about in our culture.
Okay. All right. Any other myths we should dispel?
One thing I'd like to add is that whenever there's alcohol or drugs involved, oftentimes society wants to blame the victim, and that is just not the case. Just because someone is inebriated does not mean that they have given consent to have their body violated.
If they're really inebriated, they don't even have the ability to say no, or they may say no, but it may not be perceived. And sometimes in our society, which is another problem, sometimes no means maybe or yes. I know as a salesperson, when I'm doing cosmetics, the company says, well, if they say no, it just means they need more information. You need to turn that no into a maybe, into a yes. And unfortunately, when it comes to sex, there's sometimes mixed messages, and that could be a problem as well.
Absolutely.
Okay. Who are usually the offenders of sexual assault? Who are the people out there really doing this heinous?
Overwhelmingly, it is the men in our culture who rape women, and not only just in intimate partner relationships, also in times of disaster and war. Women are overwhelmingly raped in those scenarios, and we forget about that. Not just your everyday citizens are being raped, but the spoils of war, so to speak, you hear it. Also, when disasters like Katrina, when all those people were in that dome area, there were multiple rapes committed against vulnerable people. People who are raped because they're vulnerable. That means available to the people who want to rape them for whatever the reason.
And is rape really, is it always about sex? Is that really the motivator for someone who's perpetrating this crime? Very
good question. Rape is about power and control or humiliation of the person, and it's not about sex. And clearly that is shown with the youngest victim being 3 months of age and the oldest one being 96 years old. Clearly that was not an act about sexual gratification, but one of power and control or humiliation of the victim.
So what can women do to empower themselves? What do we have at our disposal, or what should we count on? What can we do to prevent it or reduce the chances that it happens to us?
I think one of the most important things that a woman can do, or anyone can do, to empower themselves or help themselves get through a sexual assault is to seek counseling. The healing process begins once you're able to actually talk about what happened. Sexual assault is such a profound personal trauma that it's difficult to talk about. So making that first step to come and talk to someone, to a mental health professional, about what has happened to them, and through that process of telling the story and helping them deal with the long-term psychological issues will really help that person start to heal from the trauma.
Okay, very good. We're going to take a commercial break because this is really enlightening and powerful information.